Welcome back, Rich and Michael,
Welcome to you too. Thank you.
Happy New Year.
and Happy New Year to both of you
Yes, and to you.
and to our audience. And Richard, let me start with you. You've been to France recently, and before the New Year coming. So, what is when it comes to France and the problems they're dealing with? What is the main issue in France, in your opinion?
I think the main issue in France is the whole decision making apparatus. I've been going to France for a long time. I speak French. My father was born in France. I have connections there that follow from all of that. I have never in my lifetime heard the level of alienation, a random collection of people that I know, that I spoke with while I was there, and the Macron government. It is not an exaggeration to say that an enormous part of the French population, and particularly in and around Paris, which has a role in French society and culture that is hardly equaled anywhere else. And so if you don't have Paris, you already got a problem. And Mr. Macron does not have Paris at all. There is eager excitement for him to be gone from the scene. Uh, People mock him when he's on television in the bar. They mock him on the street. It's quite something to encounter. And people make comparisons. The one that I found the most remarkable was in a short conversation that actually my wife had with a person. We were at a cafe, and the person asked my wife whether she supported Mr. Trump, and my wife laughed and said, "Oh no, quite the opposite." And the person, the French citizen, responded with kind of a compassionate tone. Well, in our country, we hate Mr. Macron, but the whole world hates your president. That's the difference. So, it gives you a sense of what the feelings were. Now, what are the reasons? Well, the reasons are everything from the surface, the superficial, on to the deep and the historical. So, for example, Mr. Macron is forever undermining, reducing, attacking the social welfare system of France. And let me remind everyone, it's quite a developed social welfare system. When you graduate high school or college in France and you take your first job, your employer is required to give you 5 weeks of paid vacation every year from the beginning. The university system is basically free. You have to pay your food and your lodging, but you don't pay fees or tuitions, things like that. That's not necessary. If you have an injury or if you get sick, you are covered by a medical insurance program of the government from your birth to your death. You cannot go bankrupt out of medical expenditures the way is common here in the United States. Uh, Daycare for children is provided, for example, in Paris as a public service. There is a charge, but it's very, very low. It's something that most working class couples, if they're both working, can readily afford, which is how they can both work because they have that system in place. And by the way, all of these services, all of these public services have been in place in France for many decades. These are not new programs. They work well. They are adequately funded, a little bit less now than they used to be, and that's an issue. Mr. Macron is blamed for that. He has tried repeatedly to attack the pension program, so far, largely unsuccessfully. Some success, but nothing of the sort that he had hoped for, and so on. Number two, he is a supporter of Ukraine and therefore involved, as he was, in the effort to use the money seized from Russia, the balances in Western currency that Russia had kept in banks and banking institutions in Belgium and other parts of the European Union. The estimates about this are very fuzzy, but range from 2 to 300 billion dollars or euros as the rough size. Uh, in the first couple of years, Mr. Macron sounded like he supported the idea that private property is an inviolable principle of capitalism, and that therefore the Europeans could not and should not take Russian money. There really is no precedent for that. And since this was not a war, dwarfing World Wars One and Two, it didn't seem to him. Then they weren't able to win. Then they tried the sanctions program. It is generally admitted in France now by almost all, not all, but by almost all, that the economic sanctions have failed. They did not prevent Russia from fighting the war, funding the war, escalating the war as they needed to, and there's no sign that it's going to do that either. And that is the case. The newspapers are full of it too. The occasional drone attack on an oil tanker somewhere doesn't change any of that. And then there was the spectacular failure over the last year when the Europeans, including Macron, decided to put the inviolability of private property out the window and to go after the Russian money. First, they took the interest, which I believe they have already spent on Ukraine, but they then developed the view, Mr. Macron, together with Mr. Merz from Germany, and remember, those are the two dominant economies in Europe. The only other ones are Britain and Italy, and they are lesser than France and Germany. So they decided they would take the whole 200 billion and give it to Ukraine to get at least another year or two of war against Russia. I should mention, before I bring this to a head, that the demonization of Russia and the demonization of Putin is as intense now as it has ever been, and I include the Cold War after World War II. It's more intense now, um, extraordinary. Anyway, a number of countries other than France and Germany, led by Belgium, the Czech Republic, and one or two others, publicly refused to go along with what would have to be a unanimous decision of the European Union to seize Russian assets in that way. And the Belgians were unwilling to allow a loan to be floated that used as a guarantee those Russian assets. And I want to stress here so that everybody understands it the enormous historical significance far beyond Ukraine, far beyond anything we're discussing of the defeat of Europe because it could not seize the Russian assets. The one thing worse for Europe than making the effort to do that was failing in the effort to do that because that got them all the negatives, all of them, from their effort with no positives. No money for Ukraine, no loan that's going to be backed by somebody else's wealth. So here let me conclude by telling you what some of these consequences are. First, every central bank in the world watched this theater. Every central bank knows that if you keep money in Europe, which virtually every central bank does, that money may be weaponized against you in the manner that the Europeans, unlike anyone else, seriously tried to do and have done with the interest on that money, which means slowly but surely the central banks of the world are going to continue to diversify out of the euro, out of the dollar, because those are dealt with as partners so far. And that's one of the reasons why other currencies, the Japanese, the Chinese, are becoming slowly, they're still minor, but slowly becoming important in central bank thinking. And you have, of course, and you should be aware of this, everyone should, the spectacular rise in the value of gold and silver over the last year, which is where the central banks are moving their holdings to. Excuse me. So, this is a long term blow at the European economy in its position in the world. As if that weren't enough, the United States is clearly withdrawing from funding Ukraine. It is therefore putting a greater burden on Europe to try to keep this going now that they can't take the Russian money and the American support is shrinking, if not disappearing. More and more of the pressure comes on them and on their budgets. And they can't borrow because of their economic decline the way they once could. So they're left with the need to cut back on social welfare spending, plunging them. And let's remember, these are centrist governments or right wing centrist governments. So they are particularly vulnerable to the left wing parties and the labor movement, and because the organization to support public service is much stronger in Europe than it is in the United States, and people have to keep that in mind. So you're setting up a catastrophic political conflict across Europe in which the forces that refuse to allow the working class to be deprived so that money can be used in Ukraine, this is not going to work. And you're going to see a fracturing. One of the reasons you get the level of hysteria about Russia. You know, Americans who come out of the Cold War might think, oh, well, it's just as sort of the Cold War holds on. No, this is a more intense. The Cold War is over, but the hostility. Why? Because it's the only card the European governments can play. They are taking away from the mass of the people the social welfare that they have come to rely on. My French family relies on free higher education, on free medical care. I mean, it's just a completely different. The idea that this could be taken away or reduced motivates them to do yellow vest movements and get into the street. So I think what we're going to see in 2026 is an intense playing out of the political struggle between a shrinking, failing, conservative governmental apparatus. And unfortunately, I include Starmer, Mertz, Macron, uh, all of them basically, possibly the exception of the leader in Spain, but very few departures in the major European countries. They are going to be holding on for dear life to their political power. And their number one way of doing that is that they're protecting against the Russian menace. They have to act as though Russia was about to invade all of Europe, subordinate all of them, and that only the government in power will hold it back. And from below will be the demand for public services to be honored and to be maintained. And they will get no help from the United States because the United States has a wholly different agenda. They want what they call stability in Europe. They are Trump is eager to make some sort of deal with Putin to arrange for all of that. And Mr. Putin is not going to allow that to be Mr. Trump's achievement if he's busily supporting the anti-Russian hysteria in Europe. And so they have nowhere to turn. And so there is a sense all over France that I encounter of a real sad feeling that what is important in France, the grandeur, as they put it, is under attack in a way it never has been before, that they are suffering a very tragic decline, and they're really torn. The largest bloc in the National Assembly is the left wing, led by Jean Luc Mélenchon, a former communist political activist. And he, under his leadership, has unified the left. They stand together. They put up one list of candidates, which is why they are the biggest bloc in the assembly. They have achieved the unity of the left, which has eluded most of the left wings in other parts of Europe. And so they may be the leader in dumping Mr. Macron and becoming a major new direction. I should mention in passing, noticeable on the streets of Paris were vehicles that were BYD, cars and trucks. Those are the Chinese electric automobiles. They are coming into France. There's no question about it. And however that gets dealt with, the signs are there. You will not see them in the United States, but you will see them on the streets of Paris.
Yeah. Michael, I think one of the crucial points that Richard has mentioned is how Europe was trying to steal Russian assets to give it to Ukraine, to buy new weapons for Ukraine, to buy ammunition for Ukraine.
Well, I think that Richard was quite right. This is sort of our New Year broadcast, and we're supposed to say something about how the world is evolving in the coming year. And I think we're quite rightly focusing on Europe because that's where all of the strains are. Everywhere we look all over the world, it looks like everything's ready to snap, to break. The question is, how is it going to break? And the answer is the consciousness of the people. And the consciousness of Europe, as Richard has just pointed out, is shaped by the Cold War. And
Michael,
not
Michael,
the, it's
M-
possible that
Michael, can you hear me?
almost a year of Trump's presidency, we can now see that the United States, his strategy of restoring its former power over the world's trade and financial system is all based on the ideological umbrella of the Cold War. And there's been a 1-2 punch by the United States against Europe and against other countries. The first punch was to isolate Europe and other allies, Japan, South Korea, from trading with the most rapidly growing parts of the world economy, which are China and East Asia. How are you going to do that? Well, you want to cut off the trade and investment with America's two designated enemies, Russia and China. And you do this by, as Richard pointed out, this myth that somehow Europe needs American protection against the mythical attempt by Russia to take over Europe again, rebuild the Soviet Union, and extend it eastward, certainly to include Germany and other European countries. Now, that's all a myth, but it was the umbrella myth that enabled the United States to say, well, you need our protection against Russia. And this is going to have to come at a cost. And if you want us to protect you against Russia and ultimately China as the existential enemy to the whole economic system that we have in the United States and Europe, then you have to cut off your trade, despite the fact that all of your planned prosperity before 2022 was based on expanding trade and investment with Russia, China, importing raw materials, oil, gas, and other materials from Russia, importing manufacturers from China, and expanding German and other European industry abroad in these countries to somehow have a balanced growth and turning to away from the United States, which is not industrializing, but deindustrializing, to that. So the United States, by the time Trump took office, the United States had convinced these countries not to pursue their natural economic interest of this mutual trade and investment with Asia, which I include Russia in. And that enabled Trump to follow with what has become a 1-2 policy to say, okay, now that you've put all of your eggs in the US basket without trade with Asia, you have only one big export market, and that's the United States. Well, Trump then said, and now I'm going to pass my April 2nd Liberation Day tariffs and cut off all your trade with the United States.
Michael, can you hear me?
Yes.
It seems that your mic is not connected. You are using a. Just give me the permission to access your setting. I'm
Yes.
asking. Give me.
Okay.
I'm sending you. Yeah,
Are you
give me
able to hear
access.
anything so far?
Yeah,
Yeah,
give
said
me access.
I've clicked it.
Yeah, just accept it there. I'm gonna check it.
I mean, I don't see any three dots. I don't see where I can change the
Right below the picture, you see your picture. A little, when you
uh,
go on your picture, you see the three dots.
on my picture. Down below, okay,
Yeah, down below.
it, it's very dark.
Put
It's
put your
very
put
dark.
your put your cursor on the picture, Michael, and
Yeah,
the three
Okay,
dots appear.
my cursor's on the on. Is this the picture way down below next to your
yeah,
picture?
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
When I put my cursor on my picture, those three dots appear.
Well, maybe
It's
it's because Nima has his thing up there that I can hardly see anything. Let me put it on my picture here. No, no, nothing happens. What, were you able to hear any of what I said?
just the problem is that your mic is giving some sort of problem. It's not.
What's
We
the problem?
usually
Tell me the problem.
we have some sort of noise coming in.
Noise.
Noise. It seems that
I have no idea. There's no noise here.
I hear the noise also.
I
I hear Michael clearly, by the way, Nima, and I
yeah,
did the whole
I
time.
hear clearly, but the noise is coming through his mic.
I can't imagine what the noise is.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
I don't know how to change the mic because I the
Can you just disconnect your mic and reconnect it again?
okay. If that's the mic I'm using, and I have no idea what mic I'm using because this is a different system. Let me just see where this is. Okay, unplug it there. Let me plug it there. Okay.
It seems that you're not using this mic, that you have just disconnected and reconnected. You're using another mic on your system.
Ah, well, I know that's because that's my computer. Okay, that's the computer mic, and I don't have any idea. We didn't do a mic test, and I have no idea how to select the microphone
I
here.
think the noise stopped.
Yeah, it stopped.
I have
It
no
stopped.
idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Michael. Go
I
ahead.
can't go ahead because you have a white thing on my screen. Host control request. How do
So
you take that out? Decline. Okay, here it is. No, decline. Okay, here it is.
yeah,
Are we okay now?
yeah, you're okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
uh, what I was saying that the enabling that having cut off Europe and other countries from trade with Asia, now Trump says, well, you put all your eggs in the U.S. Trade basket, but now I'm going to close that off unless you do give backs. And the give backs is you've got to, number one, agree to very strict new sanctions, tighter sanctions on Russia and China, and by the way, that any BRICS countries that support them, in other words, 85% of the potential world market, so that you're totally dependent on the United States. Secondly, you have to, we're going to raise tariffs that you're going to have to pay. Third, you're going to have to deindustrialize your economy because now that I've closed the US market to you, and you've had to triple or quadruple their price of energy by blocking off Russia, oil and gas. Now you have to relocate your major industries to the United States, but not China, not Russia, not to Central Asia, and not to the BRICS countries, but to the United States. And if you don't do that, I'm going to keep tariffs so high that your industrial companies, especially those of Germany, that have depended on export markets for their major growth, you're going to all of a sudden have to uh, uh, close down your factories, lay off your labor force, and just passively deindustrialize. Because if you don't, then you will lose the American umbrella that is protecting you against Europe. So Richard has pointed out that the left wing in Europe is certainly in France is very strong, and yet the European Union is controlled by the hard right, pro-war, pro-Cold War, neocon uh, wing of that is appointed von der Leyen and Kallas, the passionate anti-Russians in charge of its foreign policy. And von der Leyen, when she surrendered to all of Trump's demands for givebacks, Europe has to relocate its industry in the United States away from its own employment. Von der Leyen said, "Well, we did it because of the Cold War. That's at least we have stability now." And Trump, she said, is assures stability. Here we finally have a stable ruler, and we know what the rules will be now. The rules are going to force us to deindustrialize, but that's the price we have to pay to protect Germany from the Cold War, because next time they're not going to stop at Berlin as they move west. They're going to take all of Germany. And her associates, the EU and German finance ministers and other officials said, yes, it's not just about achieving balanced trade. It's all about the Cold War. So this Cold War has become the ideology that Europe needs the United States. And of course, then Trump said, okay, now I'm pulling out the rug from under you. I'm not going to pay for your Cold War with Ukraine, with Russia in Ukraine. The fight in Ukraine is not a fight between Russia and Ukraine. It's between Russia and Britain, Germany, France, and the EU leadership, which is totally monopolized by the pro-Cold War faction that is willing to do just what Richard's described. Cut back social spending. We're on a war economy now because what we're fighting for is the European values. And the European values we're fighting for are those of Ukraine. Total military control of the media, one-party control, banning political opposition to the lead party. We need our values are those of Ukraine. We need a military kleptocracy here, just like they have. I mean, this is the nightmare that is being welcomed by Europe. So what is really at issue here? Even if we're talking about economic interests being the main driver, what's at issue is, will this ideological umbrella that the Cold War with Russia comes first? We must have we must share the British and German hatred of Russia and the Baltic hatred of Russia. That has to become the guiding principle of our domestic economic policy. And yes, there are going to be sacrifices. We will deindustrialize. We will lose the European, mainly German, also French and Italian industrial trade that we had before. But it's the price to be paid. We have to become basically an economic colony of the United States. This must be the ideological, political discussion to take place in Europe in order for there to be an opening for Europe to follow its seemingly economic self-interest, which all along was what existed before 2022. That if you're going to have an export market, you're going to look for, well, what economies are growing most rapidly. The myth is that somehow if European countries are going to industries, the steel industry, the German auto industry, German machinery industry, similar industries from Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea, if they move to the United States, can that succeed in industrializing the United States? Well, it really can't. And that brings up the second issue that we've discussed before. I think 2 shows ago, Richard pointed out that when he and I were in school for our PhDs, the one of the most popular courses was development economics. Everything they were teaching in development economics was irrelevant. They all assumed that what is development? It was Keynesianism, military Keynesianism. Spend more money into the economy and the economy will grow. There was no discussion of, well, what's the shape of the economy? What's the tax system? How do we follow the same policies of growth that Britain, the United States, Germany all followed? Protective tariffs, subsidy of industry, and most of all, keeping basic utilities, communications, transportation, natural monopolies in the public domain by socializing monopolies instead of leaving them in private hands to make monopoly rents. None of this was discussed in normal economic. You weren't supposed to question the structure of monopoly, just how do we make existing economic systems bigger, even though these economic systems, through the countries that were called underdeveloped, were underdeveloped because they were rentier systems, they were client kleptocracies, they were systems that weren't developing at all, and these undeveloping economies were just to be made bigger, which meant concentrating whatever increasing income they had at the top of the economic pyramid. All of that has to be brought into question, and you would expect that with the kind of economic shrinkage that we're seeing in Europe now, that's going to reopen the whole chance for this kind of a discussion to take place. The question is, will it? The Germans have basically, and British have banned all discussion, for instance, criticism, for instance, of the Israeli policy against the Palestinians. You're not allowed to complain about what's happening in the Palestinian areas by the Israeli expansion. You're not allowed to explain why Russia is so threatened by NATO's expansion, because American security is defined as obliterating Russian security, obliterating other securities. American security is not secure unless no other countries has the security to protect themselves against American political, military, and financial pressure, like seizing Russia's money, to force them to follow U.S. policy. So there's the discussion in the public media is not touching on the kinds of things that we're discussing on this program for the last half year, Nima. That's the question. How can Europe break through this trap of tunnel vision that it's locked into, that has prevented it from solving the problem of how do you break away from trying to save an American industrial economy that itself cannot be saved until you transform the American economic system, just like you're transforming the European and economic system in the way that Asian countries, China especially, has been changing its economic system by, as we've said before, reinventing the same wheel that the American industrialists developed in the 19th century to develop their own industry when this was called evolving into social democracy, or to put it in one word, socialism.
Go
Nima,
ahead, Rich.
I want to go based on everything we've been discussing and ask the question why or how might we explain the notions in Europe that we're talking about, this ideological commitment, the anti Russian everything, the conservative governments, all of that on the one hand, and the strategy of the United States to try to cut a deal of some sort with Russia to quote unquote stabilize. I think from the European perspective, what we're watching, and we need to keep it in our minds, is this ultimate ironic consequence of hundreds of years of colonialism. Towards the end of Marx's Capital, he makes a comment about how his next project is going to be to talk about how capitalism creates, for the first time, a genuine world economy, an economy in which all the different parts of the world participate and become uh, dependent upon. And people tend to go over that and see it as an appreciation of capitalism, if you like. Uh, I want to argue that it is, in a way, the death, at least of Western capitalism. Why? Well, I'm going to show it to you by going back to how it is that the Russians were successful in preventing Europe from seizing Russian assets to keep that war going for another year or two without the domestic opposition they are now confronted with. The reason the Russians were able to avoid that bullet, and let's be clear, had that been done and had that money been raised in that way and had it been used to give Zelensky the money and the weapons that he keeps asking for, you would have had that war continue for quite some time. Nobody knows how long, but for quite some time at enormous cost to Ukraine, to Russia, etc. Here's why. The Russians did two things, one earlier and one quite recently. The one earlier was to make it clear that if the West seized Russian assets in the West, Russia would seize Western assets inside Russia, which, because of the development of the world economy, are large. People have to understand Putin made it crystal clear. If you actually take it, not the interest, he let them take that. He didn't push back on that the way he could have. But if you take the principle, then I'm going to take your stuff. The thing he did most recently, just a few weeks ago, was to have the government of Russia go into court and to announce that if loans were made to Ukraine, which everybody knows Ukraine cannot pay back, so that the lenders, whoever they are, will demand the collateral, which is the Russian assets. That's the idea of what Europe was doing. Putin went into court and said, this is an act of the European Union. And if you do that, we the Russians, will go, here we go now, go into every court in every jurisdiction, inside every country, Malawi or Paraguay or Canada, and we will sue to recover assets stolen from us. And and we know that we're going to win a lot of those judgments, partly because they're in countries that are our allies. Suddenly, if you allow me, the dialectic of creating a world economy comes back to bite the United States and Western Europe right in the rear end. The world economy, their colonialism began and did the first steps of, has now taken on its own growth logic, drawing many of the big companies in the West to want to profit from what they can do in China, in India, in Brazil, and all those other places. And now as Hegel taught, you become dependent on those you made dependent on you. You become dependent on the dependent relationship, not just the other guy. Remember in Hegel, the master and the slave. The master becomes dependent on the relationship to the slave because the slave is made to do everything and the master can't. That's what we have now. The West can't do it. And I would disagree a little bit with Michael. Whatever their ideological note, they're not going to solve this problem, the Europeans and the Americans. I don't see it. Normally, I see, and they've gone through many crises. I'm the first one to admit it. The old joke. What do Marxist economists say in great pride? With great pride, they announce they have predicted 10 of the last 4 recessions. Right? That's a joke, but it's a joke like all good jokes that has its grain of truth. But I don't see a way out. I don't see a lot of European companies finding their energy costs so high they're going to move to the United States. Are you kidding? Move to a country as destabilizing as this one? A country that has to go to the Supreme Court to find out it can't use its own troops against its own people in its own cities? My goodness, they're not coming because it would be crazy to do so. The United States may want stability, but it doesn't have stability. And it can't offer it to anyone either. Can you imagine the conversation among German industrialists bemoaning what the United States did to them, and then having them say to each other, well, it's okay, we can move to the United States? They don't want to, and they don't see that as a solution to their problem. And they're not going to spend billions or even trillions making such a move when the risk is so enormous. That's not what they do. Here's then the irony. Just as capitalism begins in England, enables the British Empire, and then watches as the British, using their empire, cannot save their own capitalism, even using it. So they are the pathetic object we observe now. Well, Europe is following, and the United States is following. And in the same way, its own empire and the development of it, both the development they controlled, those countries that got foreign aid, but even more the countries they couldn't control because they didn't give them foreign aid. Russia, China, North Korea, Vietnam, so on. They're the leaders. They're the leaders of the breakaway tendencies. I think the depression I encountered the last 2 weeks in Paris, still one of the most beautiful cities in the world, but the depressive feeling that the people there themselves talk about is, I don't want to become mystical here, but is in a way the awareness, even among the leaders we are criticizing, that the days of the European center of the world are over, and they're not just over for Europe, they're over for where the Europeans settled. North America, Australia, New Zealand. This those places are having to readjust to a new world. They don't want to, they're worried about it, but there's no, I don't see where an option to what I'm describing offers an alternative path. And that's the final point. At the new year, reacting as we all are, or I'm assuming we all are, to a tumultuous year of Mr. Trump the second time around, when he has shown much more of his wild, extreme predilections than he did the first time, or is able to get them through. You are watching a political theater of desperate actions, and you're frightening. The Wall Street Journal gave him a nasty report card at the end of his first year, I believe, in yesterday or today's edition. Mr. Murdoch is worried that this is spinning out of control. And here's my ironic thought: that's what the people in Paris were saying. We fear it is spinning out of control. Mr. Macron is in way over his head. He can't manage it. He's not managing it. He prances around, and people make fun of him as a kind of irrelevant clown. And isn't that true of our country for an awful lot of people who are beginning to see Mr. Trump as somebody they want to back away from? Look at Marjorie Taylor Greene. Look at Elise Stefanik. Look at O'Neill, the guy from Texas. They're leaving. They're leaving because they can see on the wall they're polling. Things are spinning out of control.
Yeah.
Well, Richard, you've left a pretty big loophole when you say Europe would have to be crazy to relocate its industry in the United States. Well, the European policymakers are crazy. So, what are we to do? Well, what may introduce a note of reality is just because the government of von der Leyen and the EU have promised to relocate, I think, from 200 to 400 billion dollars of industry away from Europe to the United States, doesn't mean that they can force the actual companies to do it. How can they force
They can.
the big car manufacturers, International Harvester, the glass making companies that can't get inexpensive gas to make glass anymore, the machinery companies? How can they convince these companies to actually relocate when the companies find the same problems that Japanese companies and Taiwanese companies and Korean companies have found? Japan has committed itself to shifting 550 billion to 750 billion of investment to the United States to employ American labor instead of the steadily shrinking Japanese labor force, as the population simply is not reproducing itself anymore. The Korean companies have said, well, the government has promised $350 billion of relocating there, but we can't afford that at all because we're not able to earn the export proceeds of our cars and electronic equipment to America because of the tariffs. So how are we going to be able to force? We tried to relocate this big computer company into the American South, but Trump's people arrested our Korean workers and deported them and said employ American workers. But we found that the American workers are not up to the standards of creating a sophisticated high technology factory that we need in order to make our goods. So the Koreans who were deported don't want to go back there because of the American racism and anti-immigrant feeling that Trump has stirred up, just as the European countries are stirring up the anti-immigrant feeling against Ukrainians, Muslims, and other refugees from others. The Taiwan had promised to build an enormous computer chip affiliate in the United States from its leading computer manufacturing company, but it said we're really having problems. We can't find enough American labor that can work on high technology installations because they don't want to have a blue collar job. That's the spirit of America. Everybody wants to make money financially. We're not in an industrial capitalist country anymore. That's already been outsourced and uh, uh, to other countries. We're in a financial capitalist country, and the financialization of the American economy is what has made it so high cost. The increase in bank credit to inflate housing prices has increased the what American wage earners have to earn in order to be employed by their employers, and the housing costs prices them out of the market. The medical costs of fighting against socialized medicine, against what Bernie Sanders calls Medicare for all, which means socialized medicine, that's increasing the cost. America has become such a monopolized and financialized, high priced economy that individual companies cannot live up to the promises by their leaders who are quite loyal to the United States, who's put them in power. And when you talk about Macron being a weak leader, the fact is there are no elections in France, Germany, England for the next three or 4 years. Well, that leaves a whole interregnum of these leaders that are trying to manage Europe's economy to mesh with U.S. Demands, and there's a lot of damage that can be done, especially as Trump threatens to increase the tariffs again, to punish Europe for not relocating its industry here and employing American labor instead of European labor in what seems to be a wild goose chase that simply is not going to be to work. And so when you say that capitalism is over, what's over in the United States and Europe is industrial capitalism. In America, that's already evolved into finance capitalism. China's success has been in treating banking and finance as a public utility, just like its healthcare, its education, and other basic needs, which is just exactly what America did in the late 19th and early 20th century to become so competitive, to minimize the costs of production and minimize the costs that employers have to pay labor, because these costs are borne by government in subsidizing the cost of living and doing business. That's not done anymore. The financial aim is to maximize the cost of living and doing business, because if you can force American labor to go into debt to break even, that maximizes bank returns on credit card debt, bank debt, and all the other forms of debt that have been created by the debt burdened, debt leveraged American economy. So there would have to be, in order for a change to occur and stability and growth to recover, development economics, you'd have to transform the economy away from the way in which it's been malformed by the evolution into finance capitalism and monopoly capitalism.
And you know, since it's a new year, Nima, we are also here. I'm sitting now in New York City. We did have the inauguration, I believe, at midnight uh, of a socialist mayor who is going to have to deal uh, with everything that we've been talking about as it plays out in the America's number one international city, which is New York. And it's very clear to those of us who followed the campaign that the vote in New York, and this is in no way to take away from the campaign that Mr. Mamdani ran, which was brilliant and well done. You know, he deserves the applause of anybody who's interested in these sorts of things. But he would agree, I am sure, that the vote he got was a vote against the total mess made of the city of New York by the last 150 years of a capitalist system that chose this place to be its number one city, its biggest city, its financial hub, its playground for the rich, and so forth, that it became unlivable, unaffordable, a disaster for the majority of the people, however much fun it was to live here for those who had a solid income.
You
And
just described London.
yes, and as I was going to say, it's good, but Michael is exactly right. We're following what is England? It's London, which is a financial center living off what remains of the empire's tentacles, tribute coming in from all the old investments that were made in the empire. Meanwhile, the mass of people in Britain, the statistics are staggering of the standard of living collapsing so badly that they not only vote out the conservatives, but the labor people, knowing how tenuous their hold is, basically are producing the conservative program a little less harshly, a little less quickly, but it's not different. They're not able or willing to attack the wealth of London in order to do the kind of transformation. And I'm not clear whether Mr. Mamdani is up to it or will be able to do it here either. But he will have a hard time if he doesn't, and he will have a hard time if he does. And that's a dilemma of a society in as big a trouble as this one is. And nothing symbolizes it more than the fact that starting today, tens of millions of Americans are going to be facing sharply higher medical insurance premiums on the various programs that are still available to them for that purpose. And the Congress will not, and by the way, neither the Democrats nor the Republicans produce the movement that could have prevented that. And that's a part of this. The socialists win the mayoral, but the left, whatever you want to call it, center left, cannot protect the medical insurance, which is already poorly funded, from being worse in terms of its burden on the average person. And you're going to see tension and bitternesses here that are going to be very, very severe in this new year.
I
Yeah.
don't think there's anything like the center left. Once you say center, it's not left anymore. Center means you're not going to change things. Center means don't change the system. Just sort of go along
Keep
with
it on.
it.
Yeah.
You can't be center and be left. They're antithetical. So center left means ignore the left. There really is, in other words, there isn't a left. You and I are it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Richard and Michael. Great pleasure as always.
Thank you, Nima, and Happy New Year.
Happy
Thanks
New
for
Year. See you soon. Bye bye.
that. Bye-bye.